your new and exciting and this time Halloween themed
Yes,
stories.
yes. These are stories which I learnt long ago. They're all sort of traditional stories, local stories from particular areas. And I wanted to, I read them all in books. I read them all in books, but they were all written down by sort of either antiquarians or folklorists who wrote them all down, all these stories down. And I wanted to present them as they were originally told until they were written down as oral stories. Of course, it is a bit ironic that I've now actually put these stories together into a book and put them back into print. But either way, whether they're told or read, they're still sort of interesting stories that I like. Um, shall I just start with a story? Shall I just tell one of these stories
Of course.
now?
Let's start with your first tale of the evening.
First tale of the evening is a very unusual thing for England. It's a vampire story. There are not a lot of vampire stories from England,
Okay.
but this one is interesting for that very reason. It's called the Vampire of Croglin Grange, not far from a village called Greyrig in the north of England, which is on the A685 road between Kendal and Teebay. It was the scene of a particularly abhorrent episode. Croglin Grange had always been a peculiar dwelling because it had only ever had a single story. Yet it had a veranda that looked out over the lawns, across the lawns, across a hollow to a small church, and then beyond to the surrounding countryside. And for many years, it had been part of the land holdings of the Fisher family. Indeed, it had been the family home. But when the family eventually became too grand for the Grange, they didn't build onto it. Instead, they left and they went to live on one of their other estates down south at Thorncombe near Guildford. And Croglin Grange was let to tenants, two brothers and a sister. Now, they soon settled in there and they were very well liked by the other tenants on the estate and the local people. The first summer, though, when it came round, was a hot one, and one particular day, especially so. It had been so very hot that when it ended, although that glaring heat abated and that too bright sky blue faded to be suffused by gentle pinks and pastel reds at its western quarter, yet the warm air hung oppressively like a heavy, invisible blanket with no breath of wind to stir or shift it. Now, such days were and are unusual in that part of England, and they sit even more heavily upon people who are not used to them. Our sibling tenants had done little work that day in the sultry tyranny of a sun unrestrained by cloud or wind, and in consequence had had a light and early supper, and now sat on the veranda, enjoying the distant views the Grange afforded in the slowly fading light. Even before the sky had completely drained of blue, a low gibbous moon was moving towards the sky's southern quarter. Its gentle light becoming more brilliant as the backdrop slowly blackened. Its gentle light spilt over the lawns, broken only by the shadows cast by the garden's trees and shrubs. When they at last went into sleep, the warm air had faded more slowly indoors, and the sister found it too uncomfortable for sleep. So she left her window shutters open, which, as was often the case in those days, would have left the topmost panes of glass uncovered anyway. And she sat up in bed and watched the moon moving slowly across the sky, sliding shadows across the lawns, inch by inch. Now, in this still scene, the corner of her eye was now caught by a more rapid movement of two tiny pinpoints of light in the windbreak of trees that stood at the end of the lawns in front of the wall that separated the gardens from the churchyard. Her eye was the more drawn to them because as they moved first one way, then another, they would blink in and out of sight, like those of a caged animal pacing to and fro behind the bars. It must be an animal, she thought. Yes, an animal whose eyes were somehow catching and reflecting the moonlight. Then it stopped still for a moment before moving out from the trees, set in a dark shape of what she could not tell. The shape moved towards the grange, sometimes briefly lost amongst the shadows, but the eyes stayed always visible. It ran speedily, for short bursts, abruptly stopping and starting again, like a spider across a carpet. All the while, its eyes never left the grange. She jolted at the sudden thought they could be staring straight at her. It was closer, and so much bigger now. She wanted to get out of the room. The door stood close by the window. On it came in rapid bursts. But she found herself unable to move towards the window for the door, even though the window separated them. She hesitated, and then suddenly it turned aside and was lost to her vision. So now she jumped from the bed for the door. But as she sprang towards it, so too sprang the thing at the window, long fingers scratching and scraping at the diamond-shaped panes. But the eyes, shining with an unearthly light, glared not at its work, but at her. She came to a halt, but told herself that it was still shut out, that she could still move towards the window for the door. She took one step, and then the scratching noise ceased, and an odd plucking sound came in its stead. She looked for a moment to see what it could possibly be doing. It was unpicking the lead. No sooner had she realized this than a diamond-shaped pane fell to the sill. A hand was in and turning the latch. She wanted to scream, but was somehow unable to do anything. The window opened, and it was in, and she saw long, horrid fingers reaching out for her that grabbed her hair to quickly twist and twine and trap her hair between them before her head was pulled violently back and sharp teeth fastened upon her throat. Now she screamed and screamed before passing out. By the time her brothers had broken into the room, the creature was fled through the window, and they found their sister on the floor, the top of her white nightgown soaked by a still spreading stain from her bleeding throat. From the window, one of the brothers saw the creature scurrying across the lawns and was out after it, but the thing seemed to disappear over the churchyard wall. The wound, though nasty, was not fatal. She was young and healthy, and she made a good recovery. She didn't appear to be badly affected by her experience, but both the doctor and her brothers could not really believe that she was as unaffected as she appeared to be. And in spite of her adamance that she did not wish to leave the place where they had been so happy, both her brothers insisted on taking her on a trip to Switzerland to recuperate and to give her a break from the scene of her ordeal. Well, in spite of her thinking this quite unnecessary, a trip to Switzerland was far from unappealing, and in the end they went. And there she had a wonderful time, as well a young person might, on her first trip abroad. But by autumn she announced that, beautiful though Switzerland was, she was ready for home. Talking of her assailant did not bother her, often maintaining that he must have been an escaped lunatic who, if he had remained in the area, would not have escaped detection and capture, and who must therefore have moved on, unlikely to return. Besides, she said, showing a more practical side, there are still 6 years of our 7-year lease left to run. So they returned to Croglin Grange, where the remainder of the autumn and the winter passed without incident. But though she never told her brothers of it, she was always very mindful now to keep the window shutters closed fast, just as they never told her that each now kept a loaded flintlock pistol in his room. The wet, wild weather of February wore away into the wet, wild weather of March, mitigated only by the lengthening light that lifts the spirits with its promise of spring warmth. It was one night in March when the sister drifted from sleep to half wakefulness caused by a small but persistent noise in her room, an irritating scratching sound. Now she started wide awake. She recognized that sound, and there, staring in through the topmost panes of glass uncovered by the shutters, were those same foul eyes set in her shriveled face, and long fingers like clawed bones scratching and scraping at the lead. She screamed and screamed, sending her brothers running from their rooms. One brother met the other coming from a room. She's safe. It's back, though. They both burst out of the back doors onto the lawns and saw the creature scurrying towards the trees. They ran on after it, and before it could reach the cover of the trees, the foremost brother slid to one knee, aimed quickly, and fired. The creature faltered and stumbled, then kept going, clearly hit in the leg. They followed on and saw it half running, half hopping, throwing itself over the churchyard wall. They cleared the wall just in time to see it quickly limping down a few stone steps to a large vault that stood in the middle of the churchyard. When they reached the top of the steps, they paused for breath, and realizing that it had gone to earth there and could not escape, they took it in turns to keep watch until daybreak. That morning, many gathered at the vault. The name inscribed on the stone lintel over the doorway was that of a family long extinct. The brothers went down to the door and broke it open, and a cloying smell of mouldering decay drifted from the dank darkness within. Lanterns were called for, and then the brothers and a couple of the local farmers went into the vault. The damp chill of that dismal place sent a shiver down their spines, but then another, for as they raised their lanterns, a grotesque tableau greeted their shocked gaze. For the coffins had all been broken open. Some pulled from their shelves lay smashed on the floor, and the cadavers, what remained of them, had been flung hither and thither, savaged and clearly eaten in parts. Only one coffin lay untouched. The lid was loose and easily lifted. Within lay a whole body, tall but shriveled and withered, with skin quite brown like leather, with long legs, arms, and fingers. In one leg could clearly be seen the wound from the pistol shot. The sister, determined to see, went into the vault and recognized there that same foul face she had seen twice before. When it was brought outside, the sunlight did not affect it, nor did its torpid state alter when it was cast onto a fire, and when it was quite burnt up, the vampire of Croglin was laid. I've since learned that the stake through the heart is a method of dispatch favoured only in Eastern Europe. That this vampire had been eating the corpses of his kinsfolk struck me as strange, but a little research soon revealed the eating of corpses to be a not uncommon attribute of the vampire, before its blood-sucking proclivities came to dominate popular conceptions of the undead. I also learned in old tomes, translations of yet far older works that remained unread, it seemed, on reference library shelves for decades, of a system of principles that appears to govern, sometimes always, others occasionally only, the condition of the vampire. The vampire is prone to be affected with an engrossing vehemence for particular persons, in pursuit of whom it will exercise inexhaustible patience and stratagem. It will never desist until it has satiated its passion and drained the very life of its coveted victim. It would appear that the heroine of this tale was such a one, though happily she lived to tell it. Now, so there we have a tale with a happy ending, but the next tale I will tell you has no such happy ending at all. In the year 1348, in the town of Berwick upon Tweed, a despised man lay dying, alone, save for the four great dogs which he kept. They looked to him for food, and in return they kept people away. But nobody would have helped that dying man, even if there had been no dogs, not even the church, from which, for his misdeeds, he had been excommunicated long ago. He was a merchant by trade, a man grown rich by fair means and foul. Where he could cheat, he would. Where he could not cheat, he would sometimes employ thieves to steal things which he wanted. He took where he could, no matter whether his victims were rich or poor, and though the rich provided better pickings, the poor and uneducated people were easier to take advantage of. Now, this man lay dying for sure, ravaged by a fever, occasionally dragging himself to water to slake his raging thirst. And as he lay there, he could hear the people of Berwick outside all around him going about their daily business. The same people he'd robbed and cheated all his life. The same people who had long ago nicknamed him the Wolf on account of his predatory nature, on account of his greed. He looked a bit like a wolf too. He had a wild appearance, bedraggled hair, a lean, sharp face, and ugly yellow teeth. And like an animal maddened by pain, he began to lash out at whoever he could with whatever he had. But such was his debilitous state that all he could muster was his voice and his hate. And he began to curse the people of Berwick loudly with measured malice at first, but growing to a screaming, half incoherent tirade, a hail of hate and abuse. And outside his bedroom door, his dogs joined with him, howling, adding a cacophonous accompaniment to that horrid ranting, that hideous raging, endless. All night long, the people of Berwick listened to this horror across the otherwise silent and sleepless town. But by daybreak, the yellow was silent, though the dogs howled on. Several hours later, that noise ceased too. Nobody went near the place for nearly a week after that, but finally some men approached the door and broke it down, and inside they found the dogs, barely alive, in a piteous condition. These once strong, magnificent creatures were dragged outside and quickly slain, whilst others approached the merchant's bed, upon which lay that ghastly corpse, its face a mask of sightless, gawping terror, its lower lip quite severed by a bite from its own yellow teeth. It was fitting, but more importantly, practical, that the dogs be buried with their master. So all 5 bodies were piled on a sledge, dragged to a wood beyond the town, and dumped in a shallow grave. You see, there could be no church burial for an excommunicant, no hallowed resting place, no rite of passage from this world to the next, and so some would say, and events bear them out, no passage at all. But back in the town, the merchant's house was like an old loft chest, locked up for years, finally thrown open amidst clouds of dust to reveal the treasures within: furniture, tapestries, silks, linens, jewellery, cutlery, and all over the house they kept finding hidden away bags of gold and silver coin. All these things were quickly distributed to the crowd gathered outside, everybody then going back home when they were quite sure that the house was completely empty. The previous unpleasantness was now quite forgotten in this windfall of wealth and quality household items. Well, the following days passed without incident. At night, the moon waxed fuller, exerting an ever stronger influence upon the earth. The very tides of the sea heaved at its pull. Its shining also fell on a shallow grave. Out in the woods at night, something shuddered. Topsoil shifted, and by the night of the full moon, these tremors had grown violent, and that too full grave burst like a pod to sow its hellish seed. Back in the town, the people slept, one by one, though, as the baying grew nearer and so louder, they awoke into a nightmare, for there was the merchant rushing down the street as if gliding above the ground, effortlessly keeping pace with the four great dogs who ran with him. He looked even more like a wolf now, his face a fixed, set snarl, livid in its hate, hideous in its anger. The wolfman rushed on down the street, sometimes throwing himself at a door and scratching and tearing at it, while his dogs would sit by, flinging back their heads and howling horribly. The numbed townsfolk stared from bedroom windows and listened. Finally, some saw run from the town that dreadful pack, in the middle of which their master glided. He had robbed them in life. Now he oppressed them in death. The dawn brought a new horror. For whosoever dwelt behind a door that the wolfman had scratched took sick with a fever, and within 3 days was dead. Every house so visited, it was soon noted, had in it some of the dead merchant's plundered possessions. A week after the first visit, there followed another, then 6 more like it. Each time, those whose doors were scratched took sick with the fever and died. At the end of this time, the death toll had mounted to nearly 100 people. It was only the mounting death toll, the constant burials, that finally forced people to face the reality of this horrible revenge. A hastily convened meeting in the marketplace ended in a procession to the church for aid. The priest advised them, and it was done. That shallow grave was dug up, the occupants hacked to pieces and thrown onto a blazing fire and burnt to ashes. That ended the nocturnal visitations. But the wolf plague, as it became known, continued its grim harvest of death of its own volition now. At the end of 6 months, 70% of Berwick's population was dead. Now, this plague was actually spreading everywhere throughout Britain, but the merchant brought it into Berwick, understandably enough. His business would constantly bring him into contact with traders from all over the country and even from abroad. Nowadays, we know that the town was doomed from the moment the merchant became infected. And as it raged not just in summer, but all winter too, we now know it to be bubonic plague's even more unpleasant sister, pneumonic plague. I think even that merchant's spite must have been sated by the time the flames sent him on his way to hell. He had preyed on them in life and now in death, no matter whether they were rich or poor.
There's a to start. There's one fun fact you shared that was I hadn't known about Britain's history is that there were few vampire stories.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wonder about that story. It's kind of I have been unable to ascertain at what period in time. I mean, there was flintlock pistols, so it kind of we could be in the 1700s, we could be in the 1800s. Towards the end of the 1700s was when the Gothic novel became popular in England, and I think people started writing vampire stories. I think Lord Byron wrote a vampire story when he was staying at that lake in Switzerland, which I can't remember which one it was. He stayed in a villa. It was that famous episode where Byron and Shelley and his other guests they were all given the job of writing a ghost story, a horror story,
Yeah.
and so they all went away and scribbled away with their quills and came back. And Byron had written a vampire story. His and Shelley, I don't know what Shelley wrote, but of course, Shelley's lover, Mary Wollstonecraft, had started Frankenstein. She hadn't finished it. She didn't do it all in one night, but she'd started it. So these kinds of stories were becoming very popular, and I wonder whether this story has any truth to it. But of course, with the passage of time, it's a story. I mean, if it was a story, it's a story. If it was made up by some person who was doing the fashionable thing of thinking, "Oh, I'm going to write a gothic story about a vampire story," it's disappeared from the literary record, and then it survived only as an oral story until it got printed in ghost stories of the Lake District and other sort of books like that. So that is interesting that if it is was originally a literary Gothic creation, it has survived only in the oral record.
It kind of has like a 1700s feel to it because
Yeah, it does. It does.
we did have a series of vampire epidemics that became like global infatuation. Um, and then later on in the 1800s, though, that was when Bram Stoker um, started writing vampire stories.
Yes. Yes, everybody sort of thinks that it all started with Dracula and Bram Stoker in sort of later 1800s, but it's actually started much earlier.
Yeah.
Um,
And yeah, it has.
Byron's what was it? Byron's doctor. He took his own doctor abroad with him, as you do. And Mr. Polidori, his family were actually Italian refugees. Um, and when Mr. Polidori, Dr. Polidori had literary pretensions, but he was ridiculed by Byron and Shelley when he read some of his work out to them. They just started laughing and couldn't stop. But he went home and in a fit of pique, he more or less stole Byron's story and wrote a vampire story. And the only difference he introduced was the description of the vampire, which was almost a description of Lord Byron.
Byron influenced the image of the vampire. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. As this charismatic, sort of sexually attractive kind of figure, you know. I think that is interesting. Like I think maybe before then, vampires were just like horrific, walking corpses. But after that, they kind of have a charisma, and that this is perhaps how they perhaps get their victims. I mean, certainly at the time that before Byron left England for the last time, ladies who were out with their chaperones would be advised if they went to a party where Lord Byron was present, not to look into his eyes, otherwise they would be lost.
It, it's funny. I wanted to say, like, was very much like a vampire.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly in that sort of like sexual attractiveness, that sort of like that hypnotic, the deep eyes. I mean, they weren't bloodshot eyes. They weren't sort of like demonic eyes, but they were beautiful dark eyes. And if you looked into them, you could just be. If he gave you the look, if you gave a lady the look, you know, you'd be lost. Your
Yeah.
virtue would be lost, probably. Yeah. So whether it's a true story or not, I don't know.
Okay.
Difficult to tell.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting though, nonetheless. Sort of
Yeah,
grabbing. It feels 1700s to me because it's just the corpse and it's hiding. I feel like when we get into the 1800s, though, this is when vampires start to get personalities.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Bram Stoker that gave them the personality.
Yes, I suppose he did. Yes, that's true. That's true. The other thing about, I suppose, interesting about the story is the trip to Switzerland to recuperate. I mean, that's definitely a sort of like 1800s, early 1800s sort of thing. And late 1700s, I think. People who could afford to would go to Switzerland to take the air and to, if they were an invalid, they would be, it was supposed to be a good thing to do to be able to recover and get your strength back. So that's a bit of a giveaway as well. It sort of puts it into that sort of late 1700s, early 1800s sort of time frame, which was the high time of the first Gothic novels.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then so getting into the next uh story. Well, actually, before we get into the next story, and I
Yeah.
find it kind of funny that we're still in a story that is kind of just tied to this one little area of Britain where there's not much else going on to it. There's no werewolf stories, there's no demon stories.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I suppose werewolf stories are fairly rare in Britain as well. But the north of England does have a big tradition of black dogs. The north of England is haunted by uh, apparitions, which are huge demonic black dogs. They're often called a bar guest, a bar guest. So a bar would be like a dialect word for a gate. So it's got a barred gate, and the guest is like a corruption of geist, a ghost. So it's a gate ghost, and these demonic dogs would appear to people and terrify people with their slavering mouths and their huge burning eyes on remote country lanes right across the north of England. They don't seem to be occur much in the south of England at all. Definitely seems to be a kind of northern England thing. These bar guests, but this idea of a wolf man, I think the. I mean, again, you can't. I don't know. You can't really prove that story has any historicity about it, but I think it could be said if there was such a figure like that, it's easy to see how this deeply unpopular figure who then brought the plague into Berwick, and once people put that connection together, they would think, this is the final straw with this person, and they literally demonized him, and the fact that the disease that he brought into the country, into the town rather, continued after he was dead, kind of shows some kind of demonic curse or influence at work to the way they would think about it in those days. They
Yeah,
would think, even after death, he's still doing this to us,
yeah.
and that I
How
think that would be
people would
seen
have
as
perceived it.
sorry.
I said, which is how people would have perceived anything like
Yeah, definitely. Everything in those days had a hidden cause,
that. Yeah,
a supernatural cause, really.
yeah,
Anything bad, usually anything bad would have a supernatural cause. There'd have to be a reason why the natural order of things was suddenly turned on its head. It's got to be something evil, something demonic,
yeah.
something supernatural.
Some,
Yeah.
something supernatural.
Or,
Um,
or
so you mentioned the pneumonic plague, which is the bubonic plague's badass sister.
yeah, yeah.
How much eh, larger of an impact the pneumonic plague was in comparison to the bubonic plague? The bubonic plague kills like a large portion of Europe, or so it said. But what happens when the pneumonic plague comes around?
Well, I think basically it's the same story, but what makes it more unpleasant is that with bubonic plague, the cold weather does kill it off. So it would end when summer ended, and it wouldn't sort of come. I don't think it would come back the following spring. You'd have to wait for the next wave of infection coming across Europe for it to happen again, or for it. I mean, how that plague moved around Britain is directly relatable to how many people you've got moving around Britain, which would be a lot smaller than it is nowadays. But people like merchants would be the kind of people that would move around the country. But the horrible thing about bubonic plague is that it could keep going. The cold weather didn't kill it off, so it would keep going. And then when the hot weather came again, it would keep going. It could keep going and keep going until it had got as many victims, until it wiped the whole town out. I mean, 70% is like an incredibly high casualty rate, isn't it? 70%. That's a hell of a lot. That's 7 out of 10 people die Yeah. So I think that's the effect of it. It just keeps going. It just keeps going. It doesn't stop with the cold weather.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think that's how it would work. It would be its effect would be much more pernicious and nasty, and it would just go on and on
yeah,
until there was hardly anyone left.
yeah, yeah. Wipes out 70% people, and it's during the busy time of the year too.
Yeah, I think eventually people did get some kind of savviness about how to deal with plague. I mean, there are instances of villages deliberately cutting themselves off, not to protect themselves because that village had already got the plague, but they would say to people, you know, don't come into the village. There would be, signs up. Um, they would they would do things like if you want if maybe we need flour bringing into the village or something to make bread. So you come down the road, you leave it at this spot. We'll leave the money, and we'll also leave a bowl of vinegar because they believe that vinegar, because they were aware that somehow, perhaps this disease could pass through touch. So if we've touched the money, it's dirty. But if you wash it in vinegar, which I don't think is, it's true. That's not true. But they would say if you wash it in vinegar, then you can take the money for the flour that you're leaving, and then we'll come and collect the flour when you've gone. And sometimes that those villages just died out completely.
Yeah. Plague
Yeah,
Village.
plague villages. Yeah, yeah, yep.
Plague Village, the movie.
Yeah, very unpleasant.
Hmm. So why did you pick these stories particularly? Why did you decide you wanted to do something horror themed?
Well, certainly part of the attraction is that they're very localized. They're very set. I really like this idea that well, nearly all these stories that I'm telling in the book are set in a particular place at a particular time. So I like that idea that that this happened here, and that gives it a kind of immediacy. Um, Especially as I have sort of been to a lot of these places and had a look around. Um, Another story I tell in the book is called the Bloody Bride of Featherstone Castle, and I've been to Featherstone Castle. That's still standing. That was an old castle that's been there. It's on the borders between England and Scotland. So, I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, the borders between England and Scotland were lawless, really, for a long, long time. And if you needed a castle anywhere, you needed it on the borders. Whether you're on the Scottish side or the English side, you needed a castle. Um, it was there for a long time. I think during the Second World War, it became a prisoner of war camp for German officers, and then after that, it became a boarding school. So it's got a very dark history.
Nothing worse than being in a Scottish British boarding school
That's
or
right.
prison.
Nothing worse.
Oh, because those are made for tiny people too.
These were actually when I went round. I mean, I'm talking up here. When I went round, looking around this place, I walked into one room and there was just like it was a huge room. It was a great long row of tiny miniature little sinks for small children. So I was thinking these kids were like what we'd call primary school children. They were under the age of 11 when they went to this boarding school. It wasn't like proper size adult size sinks what you get maybe in a secondary school. So they were very young. They were just little kids, really, So they said backing them off to boarding school at that such tender age, especially in such a grim sort of place, must have been quite quite unpleasant, really. Um, Another story I tell is a story I learned about when I was in Aberdeenshire. It's on Forvey Sands. Forvey Sands is now a nature reserve, and there is an abandoned village of Forvey, um, which is supposed to have disappeared under a in a great storm. It's supposed to have it was it was constantly getting eroded by the sand dunes blowing into it. But when a great storm came along, this storm is supposed to have finished it off. This people after that they said, "This is it. That's the end of it." Again, the cause of the storm is given a supernatural explanation in the terms of a demonic priest who comes to be the new village priest. The real reason it happened, it's believed, is that, oh gosh, when was it now? 1413. In 1413, um, Mount Hecla in Iceland and Mount Vesuvius in Italy both erupted at exactly the same time and pushed up a load of hundreds of tons of volcanic ash up into the atmosphere, and this created meteoric conditions which created a 9-day storm. And they reckon it's during that 9-day storm that Forby got kind of covered in sand, and a lot of the villagers died in those houses, in their houses, because they were just covered by sand. They couldn't get out. And at the time, of course, there would have to be a supernatural explanation for this. They wouldn't have known anything about Vesuvius and Mount Hecla erupting.
Yeah.
So there's only one explanation, isn't there? It's that bloody priest.
That bloody priest, that no good evil priest.
I always knew he was a wrong 'un. I always knew he was a wrong 'un. First time I set eyes on him, I said he's a wrong 'un. Yeah.
Yeah. So where can people get your new book?
On Amazon. On Amazon. Yeah. It's published by Liminal Gate Press, which is a small press that's been set up here in England. Um, and they mainly do occult books. So they've got a few, and they're just starting out really. So it's some interesting books. Um, and I guess this one is a little bit of a departure for them because it's sort of more just sort of traditional ghost and horror stories rather than books on one of them. One of the people that run it, she's recently released a book about the Golden Dawn. The Order of the Golden Dawn in Bradford in West Yorkshire, and something which I didn't. I mean, I think in the when would it be? Late 70s. Somebody was doing some renovation work in an old house in Bradford, and they broke down an old wall or something, and inside they found a Golden Dawn temple. All the paintings on the wall were Egyptian gods, all kinds of hexagrams and pentagrams, and this was photographed, and this lady Melissa Symes, she was able to say this was the Horus Temple of a branch of the Golden Dawn. I had no idea that the gold. I'd always imagined when you read sort of mainstream books on occultism, if there is such a thing as a mainstream book on occultism. But when you read them, it's all MacGregor Mathers and people like that, all down in London, and Aleister Crowley in London. I had no idea that there was so many different branches of the Golden Dawn all over the country. There was even another branch in Keighley, which is a village, well, small town north of Bradford. So there's an awful lot of these magical. You don't really imagine sort of Victorian England, apart from in places like London, which are more sophisticated and have more, exotic influences exerted upon them, and it's full of bohemians and actors and actresses that might be interested in these things, artists and what have you. But you don't really imagine sort of sort of like. What in a day-to-day world are probably very sort of stolid, staid, Yorkshire business people that don't have any truck with any nonsense are actually at night going around to their local Golden Dawn temple and performing these elaborate ceremonial rituals. It's quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see that, these quieter, more secluded groups, even though that seems very
Yeah,
something out of a
yeah,
horror book or movie.
yeah. They would have to be very discreet. of
Yeah.
course, in those days. But I guess I mean, in America, you have the same thing with Rosicrucianism, or you did do. Yeah,
Freemasonry as well, or
yeah,
at
yeah,
least pre Aleister Crowley, Freemasons conducted magic.
yeah, yeah. Which they don't seem to do so much now, as far as we can tell.
No,
There's more like sort of self-help groups and
yeah,
charity charitable
it's
works.
actually funny enough. I just got invited over to perfect timing. I just got invited to a Freemason ceremony.
Have you? Oh, are you going?
I no, I went. I was invited to
Oh,
go.
you went.
Yeah,
So how was it for you?
I mean, for me, it was kind of comical to watch. Um, It was it was a ceremony for a changing of who the Grand Mason of the lodge was. Um and I see the bits of ceremony that used to be entirely all Abrahamic ma or primarily Abrahamic magic combined with different Egyptian and pre-Christian
Really?
European influences.
Yeah,
Um, And there are some people involved that are all that are legitimate believers and practitioners of some of these practices. Um, but yeah, no, it's all nowadays, at least in America, it's all under the radar charity because you'll have people that are lawyers and
yeah,
have other prestigious backgrounds, and so they're just trying not to draw attention to themselves. Uh,
yeah,
because there are other groups. I don't know how it is in Britain, but there's also a more advanced group of masonry called the Shriners, and they have these. You'll see ads for them. They'll have these amazing children's hospitals where they'll fly children from across the world to go to these hospitals to get treated for extreme burns and cancers and pretty complicated and difficult medical conditions. And
yeah.
they'll get all this help and they don't have to pay a penny for it. Um, and funny enough, trainers are the ones in terms of charity that have the most fun. They like to conduct MMA fights and all these other really wild charities.
Conduct what
Fundraise
fights? Oh,
MMA.
right.
Yeah, I
I
think,
think in I think I know somebody who is involved in a Freemasonry lodge in England who they do practice. They are more magically inclined, but they're an oddity. I think I get the impression. I know, and in France, I know that I knew somebody once that was a Freemason in France, and he said, you know, that we do magical rituals, and they have that side to it, but most of it seems to be quite. I don't know. I suppose you couldn't really call it secular, could you? But there doesn't seem to be any kind of magical or dimension to what they do.
yeah. I
Yeah,
think the primary focus was charity, and
yeah,
it still
yeah,
remains. I think when you go back, two, three, 4, 500 years, when people believed everything was magic,
yeah.
they're gonna practice it and teach each other it. I think it was Philip Garcom where I read, and Richard Haygate where I read um, about how they would it was normal to teach each other magic to try and go and cure people of disease.
Oh, right, right.
Um,
Yeah,
and I'm not too sure statistically how that worked, but
but there wasn't much else.
yeah, there wasn't much else. And
Yeah,
um, so in the States, it's purely optional, I think, in the lodges because now there's just so many eclectic people there. There's separate if you're indigenous, then they even have a separate type of mason's apron for you to wear.
really. Right.
So yeah, and I think too the eclecticism. Um, because I know there was a point in the early days of America that different types of Christian churches were all trying to either deport or kill each other. Um, and you have people smuggling these heathenous books like the Zohar and the Torah into the country. I can see why eventually there's a certain behavioral shift. So
Yeah, yeah. So you'd have to smuggle books in like that to get them into
yeah,
the country because they'd be stopped by
if
the
oh if you got
customs.
well if you got caught by that, you'd either be jailed or killed.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
The the
How would
Puritans
they
were
see?
extremists. They were radical. They would either deport you or kill you, most likely.
Yeah, but they had the power to do that. They were
Yeah,
in.
they had supremacy over New England for a while.
What period of time are we talking about?
1600s into
Oh, what
early
Puritans?
1700s. Yeah.
You're talking about Puritans,
Yeah.
Presbyterians. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Fortunately, their influence diminished over time.
Yes, yes. Fortunately, yeah, yeah. My friend in Vermont sent me a very interesting book. It's called Graven Images, and it's about funeral rites. Well, about the Puritans' attitude to death, and it's full of very bizarre stone carvings and great, great Gothic imagery, sort of skulls and crossbones and hourglasses and all that kind of stuff, and scythes. But what really interested me about this was that it said that although this book said although they were obviously very religious people, they didn't see funerals as a religious event. So they could kind of do things a bit differently there, but not that much differently, but a bit differently. So this was an occasion when they really decorated that the funeral horses and the funeral carts and the coffins would all be draped with these black cloth, but on the black cloth were all these skeletons, hourglasses, scythes, lots of skellies and skulls. Um, and I couldn't really understand why how that came about within Presbyterianism that they could see a funeral as a non-religious event. It's a you have to dispose of the body, so you do you make an occasion of it, but it's not a religious ceremony. I mean, maybe it's because they kind of would say, well, the soul of the departed has already gone. This is just disposing of remains. It's nothing holy or spiritual. It's just disposing of remains. I guess that's the only way I could imagine they would think like that.
Yeah.
Very odd.
It was back then. It was a very the more I research, the more bizarre it is to really try and understand the
Yeah,
perspectives of why they
yeah.
saw that a particular way. And I don't think we'll ever know because I don't think anybody's ever written it down and literally explaining
Uh,
it all.
no, I mean the Presbyterians in Britain, of course, won the Civil War, won our Civil War. So I think for about 7 years we had the monarchy was literally decapitated. King Charles I was decapitated, executed, and then for 7 years you had Presbyterian rule. And in that time, things like dancing around a maypole was just like banned. This would just be seen as I think what the Presbyterians described a maypole as a stinking idol. So as far as they were concerned, these country bumpkins were dancing around a stinking idol. And what else did they ban? They banned the theatre. It was far too frivolous, far too enjoyable.
Yeah.
So they banned the theatre. Oh, and then they banned Christmas.
Yeah, I think it was my first Christmas special. I made a joke on a picture. I added some subtext. Puritans banning fun because it was a sin.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean,
they have crazy rules, like jumping up and down on a Sunday and making too much noise was a sin. These were actual laws. You want to
Right.
you want to see you want to see the true insanity of superstition. This you can turn to the Puritans.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, that was where the witch trials happened, was it?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I was in Massachusetts, Salem witch trial.
Right. But it was were they people in Massachusetts then were they Presbyterians or Puritans or were they low
Uh,
church anyway?
it was the interesting thing about the Salem witch trials was it wasn't really like one particular group persecuting the other.
No. It was within communities, wasn't it?
It was just across the board. Like people would just get randomly accused. There's a 4-year-old that got accused and then died in jail. There's people as old as I think they're 70s or 80 who were accused and executed. So the witch trials is a bit of a random thing, but really the only thing that seems to stand when you look at the legality was um, there was no established court at the time. And
Right.
I
Right.
think to me, my personal theory was there's no established court, so there was no legal process. And that's what made it what it was. And then on top of that, it was probably an extreme embarrassment for the British Empire at the time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because they have this thing called spectral evidence, didn't they? Which is
Yes.
where a witness could come into court and say, I had a dream in which I saw this him kissing the devil's arse. And that would be admissible as evidence. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, it's not funny really, is it? 'Cause, I mean, I
I
do
mean, to
wonder.
us, it's really funny, but back then,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you've been accused of kissing the devil's arse, yeah, yeah. God,
yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, so I mean, it's kind of interesting to look back and through the veil of time and see.
Mm. But I mean, what is interesting is of course that this kind of we look you tend to look back and think, oh, of course in those days they were riddled with superstition, but the same thing did happen, didn't it, in the 80s in America, and then it came over to Britain. The satanic ritual abuse scandal. You familiar with this?
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, what the heck is going on? Like that people can believe this, and then they come over to Britain, and these people are taken seriously by the police, by social workers, and before you know where they are. I mean, I knew somebody who knew some social workers in Orkney, the Isles of Orkney, right? And there was a satanic ritual abuse scandal there that these social workers said to my said to my friend, who then said to me, he said, "Well, because I was poo pooing it. I was saying, what ritual abuse? If there's all these babies being sacrificed, how come nobody's ever been prosecuted yet? How come there's nobody saying where has this baby disappeared to? Where has this child gone? You know." And I said, "Oh, but they're not all being sacrificed. They're being sexually abused. In satanic ceremonies." And I said, "Right, okay." So I said, so these social workers that were involved in investigating this family that they believed were Satanists who were sexually abusing their children. And he said, yeah. And I said, and what did they think about it? And he said, well, as far as they were concerned, this family was as guilty as hell. But nobody ever got prosecuted. Nobody ever got prosecuted in America, and nobody ever got prosecuted in Britain. Because as soon as you get to the level of like, well, actually, you've got to, now there are legal courts with rules of jurisprudence and what have you. It's not going to get to court. And the way a lot of social workers questioned the children is now like textbook, like leading questions. You know, just sort of like keep asking, keep asking. So have you ever, and eventually, especially children are going to start saying, oh, yeah, I have seen my mum and dad doing strange things. Yeah. And were they ever wearing robes? Yeah, yeah, and yeah, have another sweet, Oh, thank you. And were they ever used candles? Yeah, yeah, and just awful. And this is in the 1980s, so people can fall prey to this kind of madness at any time.
Yeah.
It's kind of endemic in our psychology. I think it's nothing to do with any kind of like a lack of progress in the past. It's just the way human beings. I mean, what was it somebody did about that experiment about witchcraft, where the teacher said to her class, "Right, you're all going to walk past me. We're going to play a game now about witches, and I'm going to walk past me, and I will whisper into your ear whether you're a witch or not. So, first one might be, you are a witch. Okay, okay, don't tell him you're not a witch. Don't tell him." So every child in the class, she says, now what I want you to do is to divide yourself into groups, and you lose if you are in a group that has a witch in it, right? You're going to lose. So they all divide themselves into groups. Some people have difficulty getting into a group, but they all get into a group eventually. And then immediately they all start questioning each other and say, well, are you a witch? Are you a witch? No, I'm not a witch. "Oh, well, we think you might be." Well, and meets quite quickly. I mean, it's only a game, but these kids are saying, "Well, I think you could be a witch because I mean, I saw the way the teacher looked at you," and goes on like this. So eventually, the teacher says, "Right, okay, stop. Right, time for the truth. Put your hands up if I said you were a witch." And no child put the hand up. And she said, "That's correct. You've done the right. You've told the truth because I said to each and every one of you, you are not a witch when I whispered in your ear." So there were no witches. And yet, very quickly, when you've got a reason, you want to win the game, you don't want to lose the game, you start trying to find out who is the witch. And you start thinking that other people in your group, your own group, are witches. And I thought that was very interesting because it reveals how quickly people in any community might think, we don't want any witches in our group. Who might be a witch? Well, that old woman, I've heard her listening, I've heard her talking to a cat. She could be a witch. She talks to a cat, you know. My butter wouldn't churn today. I think it could be my neighbor. He's put a spell on my milk churns. And this is very quickly how it starts to spiral out of control. And that can happen in any community at any time. And it might not just be about witchcraft. It could be about, you know, more modern sort of political concerns, couldn't it? Like this person's a fascist. How do you know they're a fascist? Well, so and so said he was a fascist. Well, he is a fascist. Well, he is a fascist. And then suddenly he's a fascist. You don't have to actually be a fascist to be labeled a fascist. And if you sort of deny it,
I mean, you could replace that word with anything. You,
yeah, you could.
farmer.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. You can replace it with anything. It's whatever is getting demonized at the time, and you don't want them in your community, so you're keen to oust them out of your community. So you're looking. That's the thing. You're looking for them. You're actively going out and looking for them. You've got a wart on your nose. You must be a witch. You've got a wart on your nose, and you're an old hag. So you're a witch. And look at you. Look at you. I don't know. You've got blonde hair and blue eyes. You must be a fucking Nazi. It's it's it's
Well, it depends on how blonde their hair is. Not blonde enough.
they could
Yeah,
have dyed it. They
could have
could have
died
dyed
it.
it blonde. But
Yeah.
why did they dye it blonde? Why did they dye it blonde? Because
So
they're a Nazi.
yeah. So those things are they do occur though, but interesting though nonetheless. All right, PD. I guess we'll
Okay,
close the interview here.
close the
Buy the
interview.
book. Buy the
By
book.
the
It's on Amazon.
It is. It's called Legends Less Sweet. Yes. There's one tale from Iceland. No, there's two. There's two stories from Iceland. So that's yeah. The last one, a very scary magical story. One's just a traditional ghost story for Christmas, a Christmas ghost story, but the other one is about uh, magical power poets. Very interesting. So even if you just buy it for that one story, the Thorleif's the story of Thorleif, the Earl's poet. These were magical poets who could by the power of poetry put spells on people. Their verse was magical. Very interesting. Okay, that's it.
Okay.
Plug over.
I'll look forward to reading it.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me again, Garrett. It's been good
Yeah.
fun
Always
talking to
glad
you.
to have you back on. So thank you,
Okay.
Andy.
Maybe we should maybe do this again at Christmas time.
Oh, yes. We will definitely do this again at Christmas
Okay.
time.